So Natalie and Jordan and Priscilla and Amy are all joining us tonight to talk about, a really hot topic across the nation right now. Right? A lot of people are talking about reading. And there's also a lot of articles and research that's coming out that says, be careful, like we have to do this well, or we could do damage. And so our goal is to always do no harm and to help young people to become the best versions of themselves in the timing that is right for them. And so, over the years when the dyslexia law passed in Indiana years ago, our staff looked at the law and looked what we did as Montessorians, and we thought, we're already doing all of these things, which is really validating. We're excited. Then the pandemic happened. And because of the pandemic, things became a little bit more complicated. We went back and looked at the process and the protocols we put in place for supporting young children with reading development. And our amazing, hardworking coworkers lead it. And there's almost 20 of us that have either finished becoming reading specialists to do this type of dive dyslexia support training, or they're still in the process of finishing it. And so in addition to that, there's really good practices that we have in place just as Montessorians. And so tonight, Natalie is going to get us started to kind of give you an overview of the supports that we do as a school, and to let you know kind of the big picture of that. For some of you, it might be more information than you ever wanted to know. And for others, it might be just exactly what you needed. And so take what you will from it, put questions in if that's important to you to understand more. And then Jordan and Amy and Priscilla are going to lead us in the early childhood elementary programs and give you some real specific ideas about the age of development. And when you leave here, we'll give you homework. We'll say, go now to your teachers, your child's teachers, and get specific information, right? Because every intervention and support we do is personalized. And so just because Aunt Susie's child is reading chapter books and your child's the same age doesn't mean that's what your child should be doing. So if you need personalized, like, I think they're ready for this, touch base specifically with one of your children's teachers. So without further ado, we are recording this so that people can watch it later, but we will turn it over to Natalie to get us started. Thanks for coming.
Well, thank you, everybody. Kind of like what Barbara said, we're going to start off with just kind of how good readers read and how struggling readers read. So Carl Sagan said that Frederick Douglass taught that literacy is the path from slavery to freedom. There are many kinds of slavery and many kinds of freedom, but reading is still the path. A.C. Grayling said, to read is to fly. It is to soar to a point of vantage which gives a view over wide terrains of history, human variety, ideas, shared experiences, and the fruits of many inquiries. And Catherine Patterson said, it is not enough to simply teach children to read. We have to give them something worth reading, something that will stretch their imaginations, something that will help them to make sense of their own lives and encourage them to reach out towards people whose lives are quite different from their own. We all know that reading is so powerful and that reading is so important. But how does a person actually read? And so many people from centuries have been able to think about the process of reading, but it's not until recently that we actually have scientific data to actually support what the brain is actually doing. So with the technology of the MRI scans, scientists have actually taken scans to see what a reader does. And if we look at this little graph, it shows us basically that good readers use basically their left side of their brain. They start out with the speech sound center, which is where you hear all of the individual sounds of the words. And then it goes over to the sound symbol center, which is where they connect the letter symbols with those sounds that they've learned. And to form those, put those together to create words. They then take that into the word form center of the brain to understand how to spell different words, how to add prefixes and suffixes. And finally, we end up at the meaning and context center, where they really grab meaning and understanding from what was read. All of this happens on the left side of the brain. Now, a lot of people are talking about dyslexia, right? That's kind of a buzzword. Barbara talked a little bit about it. What is dyslexia? I went too far. There we go. What is dyslexia? Dyslexia is when a child struggles to read, but what is it exactly? It is a specific learning disorder that makes it difficult to read, write, and spell in spite of having a normal intelligence. The word literally means difficulty with words. It is caused by the brain's inability to process information through the language centers of the brain. So we know that a good reader uses their left side of the brain. So what does readers that struggle? They actually use the right side of their brain, which is more of the memory side of the brain, to access that reading. What does that mean? That means that they don't always hear all the different sounds and words. They're not activating that sound symbol center that good readers do on the left side of the brain. And all the words that they know are stored in the memory side of the right side of the brain, which means that they memorize how the patterns look. They memorize what the letters are supposed to be formed, and then they're stuck. They don't understand like how to read something that is foreign to them. If they haven't memorized it, if they haven't seen it, they can't read it, because they're grabbing that from the right side of the brain, which is where the memory part, versus the left side of the brain, where they can kind of use the speech sound center and being able to understand the sounds and the letters and decode the words. So what we know is that children who are struggling to read actually use a different part of their brain to be able to read. Well, what does this actually look like? Well, it means that they're reading well below what's expected for their age level. It means they have problems processing and understanding what is heard, not necessarily because they had trouble hearing, but because they have trouble processing it with their brains. They have difficulty finding the right words or forming answers to the questions. They have problems remembering the sequence of things. They have difficulty seeing or sometimes hearing the similarities and differences in letters and sounds. And I know that sometimes we don't consider ourselves the South, but sometimes we are. And we say pin and pin the same way, and it gets very confusing for children. Sometimes children have a difficulty understanding how to pronounce things that are unfamiliar. Again, they're reaching at the right side of their brain, that memory sound part of their brain, and they can't figure out how to pronounce those words that they've never heard before. They have difficulty spelling words because English language is complex and they don't know which way. Do I use the AI pattern or do I use the A magic E pattern? Because of all this, they end up spending a whole lot more time completing tasks that involve reading or writing, because it takes them a whole lot longer to figure it out. And because it takes them a whole lot longer to figure it out, they usually try to avoid these tasks because they're just simply hard. So scientists have been studying dyslexia and trying to understand what it is. What is it about children who struggle with reading? What is it that they're doing so that we can support them better? Well, what we know is that due to these brain scans, the brain is biologically and neurologically different. They're using different sides of their brain. And about 20% of the population are actually dyslexic. I thought that was kind of an astounding number. It affects both males and females in all different types of intelligences. And many times, not all the time, but many times, if a child is dyslexic or struggling with reading, there might be other learning issues that are accompanying it. Because they are learning with a different part of their brain, they need different instruction in order to support them. So the traditional methods don't always support them in the ways that they actually need. And dyslexia is a lifelong challenge. We know that reading is something that you do every day, all day long, for many people. And so it becomes a very big challenge their whole entire lives. However, many children who are dyslexic learn best kinesthetically, which means they learn best by moving their body, and connecting body movement to the sounds that they're hearing and the writing that they're hearing. And different than from popular opinion, writing letters backwards is actually not a sign of dyslexia. So how can we help? Well, Montessori developed her curriculum over 100 years ago, and she saw the importance of reading. She saw the importance of building these language skills. And as we have progressed through, we now have the modern technology that says, yeah, that's true. And so we understand more about how to observe and how the brain works, so we can better understand how to help them. When you are reading, there are basically 5 different parts that you have to weave together. This little graphic comes from a person named Scarborough, and it's called the Scarborough's reading rope. And it basically has the 5 different elements of reading: phonemic awareness, the alphabetic principle or phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. You weave all those components together and you get reading. So let's talk about each one of those. Phonemic awareness, when we're talking about phonemic awareness, the phonemes are actually the smallest unit made in spoken language. So note that we're starting with spoken language first, not written language. So these are the individual sounds that make up our English language. Phonemic awareness actually refers to a learner's ability to hear all the sounds in words, hear the beginning sounds, here's the ending sounds, and hear the middle sounds. Also able to manipulate the sounds, swap sounds out to make different words. According to researchers, a child's understanding of phonemic awareness is the #1 indicator of a child's success in reading. It is the most important part and the most fundamental thing to help children in all areas of their development of reading, no matter if they're just learning how to read or if they're struggling how to read. This is one of the key things that they need to know. The next part in our reading rope, whoops, it jumped ahead. Sorry about that. The next part in our reading rope is the alphabetic principle or phonics. Phonics is basically the ability to take the sounds that we heard, the phonemes, and connect it to a written symbol. And so knowing that this makes a k sound is of the letter C, and then putting those letters, sounds, and letters together to form words. In the English language, there are 44 sounds of speech or phonemes, of which we use 26 letters to form those sounds, in 127 different letter combinations to form all of these sounds. That is crazy, absolutely crazy. The next part in our reading rope is fluency. Fluency is basically the ability to read a text with the appropriate speed, accuracy, and proper expression. Researchers have concluded that reading with your child and to your child have a huge impact on a child's success in reading. If you don't get anything else from this workshop today, get this: read with your children, read to your children, read with, and have them read to you. The next part in our reading rope is vocabulary. Vocabulary is, I love vocabulary. I actually help do this with my 3-year-old niece. It's telling what words mean. She's constantly asking, what's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? Vocabulary can be easily incorporated into your everyday life as you're going to the grocery store, or you're in your car, or you're like me when my dad was working on a computer and I was constantly asking him, what's this part? What's this do? What's this do? What's this do? So it's very easy to incorporate vocabulary into your everyday life. And finally, comprehension. Comprehension is the ability to process and understand what you've read. Honestly, that is the ultimate goal of reading. Reading is the written language that we try to decode so that we can understand what somebody else has said and be able to get that communication from them. This is where we're trying to get to. So how do we support all of this? How do we support all of those five elements in reading? How do we support good readers? How do we support the readers that are struggling? Well, we try to find ways to incorporate different kinesthetic strategies into every concept, each one of these different ropes. We try to help children understand all the different sounds, the 42 to 44 speech sounds, and all the different letter combinations that make up these sounds. We help them to learn how to decode the small words and the big words so that they know that they don't have to memorize. They can actually decode a word that they have never seen before. We try to help them to read smoothly and with expression, kind of like you're telling a story. And we also try to help children think about what are they reading and why does it matter. All of these things are things that we are doing. We're doing the heavy lifting here. You guys are back behind us, helping us with all these support systems. But do not think that you have to be able to know all of these things that I just shared or even incorporate all of these things when you're supporting your learner. One of the things that we do is we support all these children with frequent, consistent, and very individualized support to help in all these different needs. And like Barbara said, one of the things that you can do is just touch base with your child's teacher and say, where are they and what can I do to help my child with their reading? As we go through this presentation, Amy, Priscilla, and Jordan are going to be sharing a plethora of resources that you can do, that you can pick and choose. But please always go back to your studio teacher because it is most important to be able to individualize what your child needs. What else do we do as a school to support this? Well, every single year at the beginning of the year, all kinders, first and seconds are screened for dyslexia. We actually use the NWEA Reading Fluency Dyslexia Screener for this process. You might have heard this from your studio teachers when they told you about it during PPCs. During the screener, if a child is determined to be at risk for characteristics of dyslexia, we do have a process and a protocol for that. We put them into intervention program. So we start using the Roxy reading program to help them understand all of these elements, as well as the Montessori reading sequence for our interventions. And if a child is struggling a whole lot, we can then bring them to a child study. Barbara, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
So Natalie, when I was young, we had redbirds and bluebirds and blackbird groups. And is that what you're talking about? We put them in these groupings, the redbirds and bluebirds group, and that's how we, intervene?
Absolutely not. We look at a child and we see what are the things that they're using and what are the things that they're confusing. The dyslexia screener actually helps us to understand some of that. And then we give them help with what they need. If they already have mastered all of these letter sounds, I don't need to review them. I need to review and support them with the things that they need. Again, it's the Montessori philosophy is follow the child's development. And so that's where we take it and say, what does your individual child need? Those are the lessons that we give them. The things that they already know, we can review them to make sure that they're still working on them, but we focus on what they actually need. Let's see here. And Amy, now we can talk a little bit more about specific resources and helps for each of the different age levels.
All right, I'll go ahead and start. So one of the first things that I have on my slides, Natalie, if you go ahead and progress to the next one. So go ahead and read those 3 words to yourself. One of our former teachers here at Community Montessori, before she moved to Nashville, Tennessee, she had worked in early ed and now she's teaching at a Montessori school in Nashville. And she has started a workshop just like this that I took with her and I loved it. So you might have noticed that you read those words, triangle, Montessori, and then the third one might have tripped you up, right? That's actually etymology. It's the study of words, but it kind of helps show you how you know those two first words, triangle and Montessori, because you're very familiar with those, right? That third word, unless you're familiar with that study, you're probably gonna get tripped up. And so reading fluency not only involves the ability to decode, it has to also involve background knowledge, right? So every time that you read to your kids, like Natalie was saying, every time you go to the zoo and you're pointing out the animals, that all helps build up the background knowledge for your child, so that when they start to read, they're reading, and they will read to confirm what they know as well. And so I'm going to kind of give you a couple things that you can do with your early ed child that will help support your child's literacy development. And you have this stuff at home, it'll be very easy for you to do. One of the very first things is, and sorry, Natalie, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I unfortunately don't have it in front of me. Okay. So offer concrete experiences, right? Like take them, and it can be things that are, free or low cost. You obviously don't have to take them overseas to Paris or anything like that, but take them on a walk. Point out if you're into cars, make sure that you're using the right terminology, right? My nephew can tell me, I of course can't do this, but he can tell me what each car, the make, the model, it is a passion of his, right? And so he's 21 and he's teaching his 3-year-old sister that same background information. So she knows now what a Porsche looks like and what, a Dodge Charger looks like. So whatever your passion is, make sure that you're using also the correct terminology, right? Instead of houseplant, tell them this is a philodendron, this is a monstera. Oh yeah, I see that bird too. Let's look it up. Oh, it was a cardinal, or it's a tufted titmouse. So make sure that you are giving them those words, even if you think that those words might not be. It's easy. Sometimes we see people who are still kind of doing that baby talk with the small children. Our children, even at 2 and 3 and 4 years old, are so capable. They just need the word, and they know it. We've had children, especially at the early ed level, they will know like 26 different birds in Southern Indiana, just because we've been doing vocab development down there with our 3-part cards. And, the best thing is to hear a kid, in the middle of winter be like, that's a dark-eyed, junco. They point out the bird to me and I'm like, yeah, all right. So that's one thing that you can do. The other thing is to tell true stories. And I think that people hear this and they get kind of worried. They're like, I'm not a storyteller. But your early ed child, they they don't notice, right? They love stories, they crave stories, and they just want to hear all about your day. It can be a story about your childhood. Sometimes in my studio, the very first story I tell, I have a scar right by my eye. And so I tell this like tiny, like 5-minute story about how I got this scar when I was their age. But it can also be as simple as, hey, I was on my way to work today and guess what I saw? And it can be so simple. Sometimes just like telling them about the praying mantis that you saw on top of your car and how you carried it on your hand to put in the grass. And they'll be like, and what did it look like, mom? And what was it again? And then what did you do? Did you see where it went after you put it in the grass? They will keep asking questions and they love those. But this also helps them with reading development because you're telling them a beginning, the middle, the end. There's a conclusion to the story, right? Like I put the praying mantis in the grass and then I had to drive to work. But there is obviously a beginning too. Um, and even once your children, like definitely read to them every day, but don't feel like you have to be stuck in the picture book stage for early ed, for like that 3 to 6 age group. If they love books, and even if whatever their interests are, get a small chapter book. And you can start reading to them just a little bit every day, whether that's usually the chapter books, the beginning chapter books, their chapters are very short. So you can read one chapter a day, one chapter a night. When you start to read the next chapter, ask them questions. In Pentagon, we just happen to have Ramona, which was from like the 1980s, but it's a really great story because it's about a little girl. I mean, there's a lot of books in the series, but it's about a little girl in kindergarten. So it really resonates with these kids because it's things that they can relate to and that they know and they feel. But the beauty of reading to them books at this age that are chapter books is that they have to create those pictures in their mind. And that helps so much with comprehension. If those true stories that you're telling, they weren't with you when you found the praying mantis on the top of your car on the way to work, but they're picturing you, right? Finding it on top of your car. You might be reading a book about Ramona who's in kindergarten, and they're picturing Ramona, right? Everyone pictures her different because they haven't watched the movie, right? And they're just picturing and creating those pictures in their mind. And that's important because you might have a child who can decode, but they might read the word purpose as propose, right? And technically that's correct, right? Propose, if they are thinking, oh, that's a silent E on the end and it's going to make the O say its name, right? But if you've read to them, if you've been having those conversations, like making conversation with them, they're going to know, oh, that doesn't sound right. Purpose. So it's not just about decoding, right? They need that comprehension aspect and help them by letting them create the pictures in their mind. And that's telling stories and reading them books like that will help them. Also, we always recommend having reading materials available, even whether it's field guides. Our children love field guides, even though it's pretty big, lots of words, they can't read it. They love it. And you can incorporate reading materials into every aspect. So, for instance, if you have gone out and bought a play kitchen for your child for the holidays or for their birthday, go to Panera Bread, go to the pizza shop and buy and get a takeout menu and laminate it, and put that in their kitchen so that they can be a restaurant. So little things like that also help, and it makes it, it normalizes them. It normalizes that for them. So they're constantly seeing words, they're constantly seeing reading available. Let them watch you write list, whether it's grocery list, whether it's writing a note and hanging it up for them. Some of our children even have notes in their lunchbox and they love it. So let them see that. And we in Community Montessori, we teach cursive first, just because all the children at this 3 to 6 age, they're usually, when they start scribbling, they're doing those big loopy movements. And cursive does the same, and it always starts at the bottom left corner. So we do cursive. And so you can show them cursive. If you show them print, that's fine too. But normalize that handwriting so that they see it, so that it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to write something. You won't know what it is, but you're, like, I'm going to write this to your other grown up. Um, and they're going to be able to read what I was thinking because I'm writing it down. Also, play the question game. The question game, we call it the question game, but it's just where we ask questions like, hey, do you remember what we did yesterday? Yeah, we went to the zoo. What kind of animals did we see at the zoo? That helps them with thinking or with comprehension and remembering what they read or remembering what they did too. So we do it a lot in the studios where we read something and we're like, yeah, do you remember what she did or what happened when we read last time? Nursery rhymes are also good. One of the best things that we have found is that just rhyming with children, that's a skill that they need to have. And so do nursery rhymes, we do a lot of rhyming games. We also recommend teaching lowercase. It's really hard, I know, for some people because they automatically think I'm going to go ahead and show them the alphabet. And I think it's intuitive for some people to go ahead and do the uppercase letters. But if you think about it, you don't see uppercase a lot anywhere, other than the first letter of proper names and sentences. So teach them lowercase first, because that's what they're going to see most often. And we do recommend like not just the letter name, but the letter sound. Like B says B, M says right? Because sometimes the letter names don't sound like their sound, obviously. Like they might say, oh, that's an M. Okay, what sound does that make? Right? Or that's an E. Okay, that says eh. Like egg or elephant. And I know a lot of people, I grew up, of course, playing the I Spy game with colors. You can do that with sounds too. I spy something that sounds like, and you might even pull some things over. If you're at a restaurant and you're trying to keep your child contained, have whatever's on the table, spoon. Oh, I see a spoon and a fork and a napkin. I spy something that I just mentioned that starts with a N. And that's a great game to play, especially at restaurants. But definitely follow the child. Try not to pressure them. Don't worry about getting Bob books or first readers. If your teacher has told them that they just started reading, that might be kind of pressure, right? We are going to be doing that aspect at home too, or at school too. You don't have to do that at home. Worry about reading other books and reading to them. Thanks, Natalie.
Hey, I'm Priscilla, and I'm going to talk about some of the lower elementary phonemic awareness and phonics strategies that you can do at home. And some of these are going to be for children who may not have mastered all of their letter sounds in 3 to 6. That's the typical age during their sensitive periods. And so some of these games will be more foundational skills to help them to like pick up ground. And then other ones that I'm going to discuss are going to be for neurotypical children, children with typically developing brains. So just as a review, a phoneme is the sound that our individual letters or groups of letters make. There's 44 in English, made up of 26 letters in 127 different combinations. So if your learner is still mastering their individual sounds, here are some games that you can play. Amy already discussed the beginning, middle, and end sound to a degree. So usually if a child is really emergent in figuring out their sounds, I might just say, what's the beginning sound of cat? And they would say, what's the beginning sound of dog? Duh. Okay. And then you go to more complicated ones, and then you can move on to beginning and ending sounds. So we don't usually do the middle until the end, which is not necessarily intuitive, but it's easier for them to hear the last sound your mouth makes. So you do the same game, only you would add the ending sound. And then when they've really got a flow with beginning sounds and ending sounds, and remember this is all auditory, then you would add the middle sound. If they can hear the beginning, middle, and ending sound of words, they are segmenting those sounds out, and that is a really, really a good indicator that they are like picking this up and they are ready to move forward. Go Get Me games. You might have 5 letter tiles on preferably lowercase in the bathtub or on your refrigerator. So you can get 5 of them, maybe ones that they know, a little bit of a mixture of ones they know and don't know. And then you can say, go get me the go get me the t, go get me the s. I always start with letter sounds. When they've mastered all 26 letter sounds, then you can start working with Go Get Me games with the letter names. But the sounds are most important because you can read without knowing the names of any letters. Knowing the names of letters helps you to spell, but if you can spell the sound, you're golden. So focus on those sounds. Sound, gesture, and symbol are some games that you can ask for after this recording is finished. We can make that available to you if you're interested in playing this game. But we have a list of all of the sounds that we make and then a gesture to do with it. And then we show them the symbol, which is the letter. So if I was trying to say the sound "w," I'd say the sound "w," and then we have a lesson where we show them that "w" kind of sounds like when you're swirling around a rope and it goes "w, w, 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 w." And then I would immediately show them the sound symbol, which is W. Another one is the chip game. And now if you can go to the next slide, I have 2 pictures of the chip game. So you can use any objects you have at home, marbles, stones, beans, whatever. Legos, anything small. And so basically what we do with the chip game is we come up with a word auditorily. So the first example I have on here is counter. I only put the letters down here so you can kind of see what we do with it. But for the children, it's all auditory. So you might say, we're going to play a game. And these colors, the red chips, represent the consonants. And then the yellow chips represent the vowel sounds. So usually I review are the main vowel sounds. And then they all say their names too. And those are also vowel sounds. So I said, okay, we're going to put a chip down for every sound we hear, not letters, sounds we hear in the word counter. So there's k, and then the vowel combination ow, then n, then t, then er. ER is 2 letters. It makes you want to put 2 chips, but you can't overthink it. It's just one sound, counter. And then you would say, okay, let's see. And you would present it to them in the correct way. And then, you know, you can gently, if you can say, if yours needs to move, you can always move the chips to make it match this one. And you show them, we point to each chip as we say the sound. K, ow, n, t, er, counter. And then you can play it with any number of ones. Another one that I had was stumble. The ul at the end, you have st, which is your vowel sound. M, b, ul. Le is kind of hard to be like, oh, that's just one sound, but it is. And so they would just put 1 chip. So just remember, they wouldn't see any letters. It's all auditory. You can start with something as simple as it or cat, and then move your way up. So these words would definitely be for someone who's a little bit more advanced in these letter sound games. I would start with something with 2 sounds and work your way up if you're an emergent reader. Now, if you want to go back to the previous slide. Yes. Rhyming games and songs. One of the ones that our 6 to 9-year-olds love is Down by the Bay, but there's a bajillion on YouTube. So feel free to look some up and just see what resonates most with your child. And, you know, they're creative. You're creative. You can come up with a little ditty or a little rhythm and get some rhyming words and make a song of your own. You can make it fun. Matching games are really fun. So sometimes I just use Post-its and I'll put maybe 3 to 5, depending on what your kiddo can do. Sounds. Maybe I'll mix 1 or 2 that they know, and then 3 that I'm going to present to them. And then we're going to practice with it, and we're going to try to find the match. And usually when they turn a card over, so you have 1 set of like l, m, s, b, a, l, m, s, b, a, and then you make the identical set and you put them over. And so each one that you flip over, you have to say the sound. So let's say I flipped over a l, and then I flipped over a s, and I was like, they don't match. And then you put it down. They're still getting that playfulness, but they're also getting the ability to hear every one of those sounds every time they pick a card. And then when they make the match, obviously they're going to be happy. Keep it short and fun. Keep it on a high note. Keep it light in everyday conversations. The last one is one that I came up with a little bit ago. It's called the sound train. And then Natalie, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll just kind of show you how it works. So when I think of blending sounds together, you have to have individual sounds to decode, but they have to flow together to make the word. If you have individual sounds, but you don't blend them together, they don't make words. So when they blend them together, they make a word. It made me think of a train. And so there's an engine, which is like us trying to make the word. That's the work. But as each car is added to the engine, you blend more sounds. So when we teach reading and we teach decoding, we don't do each individual sound and then blend the whole thing together. We blend as we go, just like each car is hooked onto a train. So if you have cat, you start with k, then you have a that's attached to the k, so you say cat. Then you have t, and you already had the k, the cat stuck together, and you add the t, and then it says cat. So you're just joining cars together. So you can play games like that. You can just like write some different sounds. You can, you know, even take it off this slide if you want and print it off and write different sounds on the different the box cars that's on there. And you can make different combinations to make different words. And as you join them together, you just join the sounds together. If you want to go to the next slide. So if your learners mastered their individual sounds, oh, and you can go to the, if you can want to skip through those two and go to the next one. So when you can do modeling with everybody, no matter where you're at in the sequence of reading. But when your learner has more familiarity with reading and they're able to read sentences, then this is more the strategies that you can do with them. So modeling. You can read and track the words with your finger, and then you can start, stop at a word that's a little longer and segment and then blend those sounds, kind of like we did with the sound car, as you go along. So you can model learning how to decode a word. You can have them read keywords. So you're reading a passage, following along with your fingers so they can track where you are. And then you can find a word, maybe something that they could sound out that's 3 or 4 sounds. It's completely phonetic. You know that they know those sounds, and they can just read those keywords. And they get to read a couple words in the sentence or the passage, and you read everything else. And that takes the pressure off, makes it fun, but it helps them keep engaged. Another thing is choral reading. I don't think people talk about this enough. Choral reading is where you're reading the same passage at the same time. But if it's a struggling reader, or they're just learning to read, their fluency isn't as good as yours as the adult. So when you're reading it fluently, they can kind of catch up. And obviously, we're going to slow down our pace a little bit, right? But when you're reading it fluently, then they can kind of catch on more quickly and help their flow. And then it also helps to build confidence. And then if you have books that repeat phrases a lot, I think there's a book that I used a long time ago called Bears Don't Sleep or something like that. And it just had some repetitive phrases over and over. And it really helped the child to gain confidence and recognize those words more quickly the next few times. And, take turns when you're reading with your kiddo, especially when they're feeling pretty comfortable with reading, but they just don't want to get too exhausted. And you are like, you did all your work at school. This is just for fun and continued practice. You guys can take turns reading page by page or even paragraph by paragraph, so that it doesn't feel so heavy for them and it's just light and engaging. Some opportunities for reading at home that are really natural: making lists, leaving messages that are 1 to 2 words with magnets on the fridge. If they're an emergent reader, if they can read full words and sentences, write them like a whole, letter to them. You can read in front of them constantly. Always speak positively about reading, and the opportunity to read is so fun. How much you loved reading the book before watching the movie, and then share what you've learned from reading. So if you were reading an article about the science of something, share, I was reading this article today, and that kind of goes with the vocab development. I was just reading this article yesterday about the science of how the bird's wings work, and when they flap they do yada yada, and I just thought that was really interesting. It's a true story. It's something you read. It models that you were reading and you learned from it. Nonfiction text for researching or just reading because it's fun to learn about animals and plants and mammals. It's fantastic. For fiction, you can talk about all the different elements that they have: the plot, the characters, the setting, all kinds of things. The adventure that you got to go on with the main characters, all those different types of things. And then, if you're researching something that you really need to know, like a recipe or how to fix the kitchen sink because it broke, they love seeing things like that, where you had to research and figure out how things work and then talk them through what you learned and then, help them fix it. I think Ashley had a question, if you want to go ahead.
Nope, that was an accidental push. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks.
All right, Nellie, you want to go to the next slide? All right, so how to support the right sequence. If they are still decoding words, and I'm talking about sounding out words and slowly putting them together in sentences, that's that emergent reading. Just focus on that part. Don't try to ask them questions about what they read. They put all of their brain power into decoding, and asking for meaning about what they read is not where you want to be. Now, that's not to say that you don't want to read to them and ask questions about a story, but if they're reading it, that is the last portion of what the navigational pathways that you get in the process for reading. The comprehension is the very last one. So try not to feel overwhelmed by that, and know that they can comprehend so much, just not when they're decoding. For kinesthetic learners, especially, use whiteboards and chalkboards to support their needs. It's a bigger movement. Your hand just feels different than pencil paper. They might not be ready for that, or they might just learn better with a whiteboard or chalkboard. They use a lot of chalkboards in 3 to 6. I have kids that like to write their words every day on a chalkboard still in 6 to 9. But the biggest, hurrah for them is whiteboards and markers. They absolutely love writing on whiteboards, and it has a different feel and gives a different feedback to their hand and their brain than, as well as the chalkboard, than it does for pencil and paper. Other kiddos like to trace letters and sounds in the air, writing in sand. My mom used to have us write on a tray full of pudding, and then I gotta, eat it off the tray afterwards. So make it fun, make it engaging. You can even, pour out different marbles and like trace the letters in the marbles and get that different movement. That's really, really helpful for kinesthetic learners, especially if they have dyslexia or if they are struggling with that. And then make sure that you're choosing stories that they're going to read that are at their ability level. So they should know most of the words and only have to decode about 2 to 4 words in a total 20-word passage. If the child is decoding too much, it is not helpful, but actually harmful to their language development. So it's like, oh, they're getting all this practice, but then you're getting to what we call frustration level. So remember that instructional level is where we want to be as teachers and instructional caregivers. For you all, you want it to be, just barely over too easy, just barely over, because we're doing that heavy lifting. We'll take care of the real hardcore instructional practice, and y'all just enjoy reading together. Just enjoy that bonding time. For a child with dyslexia or an emergent reader, expect less output from that child. Their workload is 1,000 times harder than it is for a child that's neurotypical, that their brain develops in a typical fashion. And so they have to work so much harder that they're not able to put the same amount of output. It'll take them, so much longer to do a task at the beginning where they're in that phonemic awareness stage than it would be for a neurotypical child. So just don't expect as much output for them, and, give them more grace. So like equity versus equality.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk a bit now about comprehension and vocabulary, and also what we typically see sometimes in the upper elementary classroom, especially if a learner has not developed all of the skills that Priscilla, Amy, and Natalie talked about. And I'll probably echo a lot of what they said. You'll likely notice a theme here with lots of exposure to reading, to written words, to vocabulary, and that's the same here. But what I've typically seen in the 9 to 12 classroom is there's a big shift at this point from the child learning to read to reading to learn. And like we saw before with the brain development and with the rope, the weaving of reading, if they haven't developed those threads by this point, it can become really difficult for them. They can no longer cope with the strategies that may have worked for them previously. If they were worrying about like memorization before, having to now decode much more advanced technical and like bigger vocabulary words is going to be a lot harder for them. This is sometimes referred to as the 4th grade wall or slump. And if you could go to the next slide, Natalie, we'll talk about some other reasons for why this may happen. Could you go forward, Natalie? Sorry. Oh, sorry. I think it's, could you go back one? My bad. There we go. So like we said before, there is that shift there of learning to read versus reading to learn. So by this point, it's kind of expected that they have a basic reading ability. And obviously, if we notice that the reader was struggling, we would go back to the strategies that Priscilla, Amy, and Natalie suggested and kind of help them from there, because obviously they can't really progress unless that has been mastered. If they relied on memorization when learning to read and not on the rules of language or phonics, that can also be a hurdle that they will have to overcome. The words, additionally, that we usually see in grade 4 and onward are also low frequency. They're typically unfamiliar, so like etymology from earlier. We use a lot of technical terms as well in our curriculum, so it can be a lot for a child first moving up to have to overcome that. And they tend to be more abstract and not what we typically use in everyday speech, which then makes it harder because they're not being exposed to it often. And then if they already are struggling due to frustration and due to lack of accuracy, or if they're being pushed too hard, like Priscilla was saying a moment ago, and are too frustrated, they're not likely even going to want to read. They'll refuse to do it, or whatever other reason. It'll be a lot more of a challenge for them to even open up a book, let alone to progress through all of that. And so how can we deal with this? How do we manage this? So if you could go to the next one, Natalie. So some things that we can do, like what was said before, is encouraging the use of and the application of advanced vocabulary, as well as any sort of vocabulary, as much as you can, really, in everyday speech and situations. Some way that I do this is I might have like a word of the day or like a vocabulary word that I've learned that I want to share, and we try to use it in a sentence at least once before the day ends, so you can kind of make it like a game, make it exciting and fun. Reading stories together and either talking about it or even having them acted out and doing like a skit that really shows if they've understood it or not. If they're acting out what the characters are doing and it's accurate to the story, you can see that they have comprehended it. But you can also help coach them along. You could say, why did this character react this way? Why was this character angry? Why did this happen? What did happen? You know, just all sorts of questions like that to help engage them and think about what they have read, and also understanding that writers write for a purpose. We read for a purpose. All of that has a purpose, and we can help them find what that is. And then at this point, you could probably start having them choose more of their reading material and help coach them with that. Obviously, you don't want to get into a point like Priscilla was saying where it's too difficult. Some kids are very ambitious. They're like, I want to read Don Quixote or something like that. And you're like, hold on there. We got to get some other things out of the way first. But you can find ways to incorporate that. Maybe that's more on their level. But the more interest that they show, the easier it's going to be to help them and to have them exposed to reading. And this could be a variety of ways. It could be food boxes, newspapers, signs, posters, billboards, shampoo bottles, all sorts of things. And also talking to them about different types of writing and reading. So they could read an article, or, you know, with like a newspaper, those are going to be different than reading a book. So there's all these different ways that you can write and read and express what you want to express and the different information you can get. It could also be like a research project. So you could do something like, let's go find a recipe, or let's go, maybe we have to find like the type of shampoo we want to buy, and you're going on this research hunt, or like you can really be anything like a Google search to find what you're looking for together, but helping them to see that there is that purpose to reading of, we need to use this to find information to figure out what we need to find or to discover. Something else that I really like to do that I think, especially at this age level, they love is playing games like Hangman and Wordle, where they're having to figure out like how a word might be represented that they cannot identify right away, and using the rules of language to kind of help them figure that out. But there's a lot of different ways, but I'd say the biggest way is really making sure that we're continuing the work that we're previously doing, starting from early elementary all the way up, and even early ed, like all throughout. This is a lifelong journey. We all have work to do with reading, but continuing that work so that way when they do get to 4th grade, it's not this like what we typically see is this like immediate crash when they first get in if they are struggling readers. And so helping them to not get to that point, because going up from there can be really difficult and it can cause them to have a big aversion with reading. But those are just some ideas with comprehension, even movies too. Like if you read a book together and then watch the movie version, you can kind of see like they took the reading that they had done from that book and translated it into a visual. And another game I love to play with learners, aside from like skits and stuff, is a game called Body Spill. If you want to incorporate more movement, so kind of like what Priscilla was saying, where there's like a movement attached to a sound. You can even do it whole body, where they're like using their bodies to spell out letters. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But that is what we would typically try to do, at least in 9 to 12, to help with all the other things, but then additionally to help them become strong readers and to be able to handle the material that they'll continue to experience throughout their school career.
Well, thank you, everyone. So now you've heard lots of information about what reading is, what good readers do, what struggling readers do, lots of different ideas from early ed, 6 to 9, and even 9 to 12, about typically developing children that are learning how to read up to the children that are struggling how to read. So this is now a time where we're just going to kind of give it up to you guys. What questions do you have? You can write those questions in the chat and we will answer them, or you can simply raise your hand and we can answer them here. So I'm going to close off these slides and let you guys have an opportunity.
While people are thinking about things, Natalie, I just want to help everyone show some appreciation to the 4 coworkers who put this together and all their great knowledge. Feel free to use your emojis or hand clapping or however you want to do it. That was really valuable information, and we really appreciate you each taking your time and thinking of it from your perspective and your age level, and wow, really powerful. So thank you each so much for that. Thank you.
All right, so I have one question in the chat. It said they started reading some classic chapter books with my son, but they are way more brutal than I remember. Matilda lives a lonely and unsupported home life for the first half and frankly terrified school life for the second half of the book. Should I worry about sharing these stories that I grew up with my child? I take it you're a 6 to 9 parent. Priscilla, do you want to talk about that?
I mean, yeah, I think it depends on the grade level and the emotional capacity that you feel like your child is able to be exposed to, first and foremost. I mean, certain elements of Matilda, I would not agree for a 3 to 6-year-old child, but I do think that real life situations, if tailored in the right capacity, benefits or like just helps lead into a discussion, a family discussion, that there are different types of home lives and different types of things. And you can talk about how there's a lot of hyperbolic situations in this book. So they make it seem really scary to cause more drama in the book and things like that. But I know we talk in 6 to 9 about real and true things. We talk about you know, the life in the civil rights movement. We were just off for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we were talking about his life, and we had some really hard conversations that were really sad and evoked a lot of feelings. And I think it's just really important to screen the chapter before you read with your child, or, you know, just peruse the book beforehand and just take note of the elements that you're like, oh, like this is something that it was the most beloved book, but I didn't really realize this was in here. How can I frame that around a conversation? And then always like check base with your child. You know, there's times that you might think that they would be ready for it, and maybe you just need to wait a few years and still read that book if you feel like it's representing the same philosophies that you have as a family, or can help you to teach your said philosophies. So I think exposure is good as long as you frame it in the right way. Did anyone else have something they wanted to add to that? Barbara?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I purchased a Junie B. Jones book for our kinder twins, and they're getting ready to be 6, and it was about her going into kinder. So I thought, oh, this will be simple enough. Junie B. Jones. Well, there was so much hate, stupid, you know, I was like, what have I done? You know, and I, for a minute, I could kind of just self-correct it in the moment, you know, I could just use a different word. But then it became like too complicated. And so I said, actually, you know, we're going to read something different. And so we had to try to find a different book because they were really interested in that storyline. And so it just taught us that we need to find some books that work more for their family, you know, that talk about things that are real in their life. So.
Thank you, guys. I had another question that said, is using a Kindle or an iPad to read, quote, bad? Who wants to take that one?
I could, if no one else wants to. There's a lot of thoughts about this, right? Even I do sometimes, where it's like making sure that my screen is, if you can get like a warm temperature, sometimes that helps with the eye strain. Not all iPads do that though. And sometimes the text on it can also be kind of harmful. Like I've heard if it's a serif font where it's like the font has like little pokey ends on it, but on a digital format can be actually harder to read than a non-serif or sans serif font, which doesn't have it. It's more like the smooth looking fonts. So maybe that's something to think about. But personally, I don't know, maybe other people would disagree. If your child is reading in general, I would try to encourage that in any way you can, in addition to maybe other materials too. So I don't think a little bit of that is necessarily wrong, but maybe not fully on there like for hours and hours. But there are some things you can do, like sometimes you can change it to be like inverted, where it's the dark background and the white text might be a little easier for them. But do you have more to add on to that, Priscilla?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Jordan. And then also, I think there's a good balance because you want to establish a love of reading. So just touching books can be a whole tactile experience that's so important. So I definitely would hold off on the Kindle until later when you're a little bit older. I know, Jordan, you're a 9 to 12. And so like that's definitely the time where they're like, I want techie things. And especially if you're trying to travel and you want like 50 books, that would be a really good time for a Kindle or an app like that. One thing I was going to say, with the limited screen time, because it can really wear on your eyes, there are some really good websites that are connected with your New Albany-Floyd County Library. So every one of you all who have children here at the school, unless you officially declined it, have, and I believe in 3 to 6 as well, correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara, but I believe every child here has a library identification card and an account with the New Albany-Floyd County Library. And they have these wonderful things called Libby and Hoopla. Libby is mainly for reading aloud to you. So if you're in the car and you don't have the book in front of you, but you still want it to be reading instead of them being on a screen, that's a great way to use something like that. But they also have Hoopla that also has some different websites and connections where they can, like, for children who are learning to track words as they read, they might not be able to read them, but track them. They like highlight the words that you read. And there's also epic.com or getepic.com. And that's something that we use in 6 to 9. And so it's just a big website with a library full of books, and it has all different kinds. It even has videos on it. So it provides an opportunity if you can't access the book, if you're at your local library and they don't have it and they won't have it for weeks, but they have the digital version, you can just look it up and read it. So that's a beautiful option. And so sometimes I will use that to model it with my children, but I also recommend, tactile first is the first love. And then as they gain their love of reading, then you can add these sources with just limited screen time so you don't, wear out your eyes. So Amy, did you have something you wanted to add with that?
Well, I noticed that McKenna had said that she was actually reading to her son using her iPad. So if that's what you have, like, absolutely use what you have, like, especially if you're getting picture books or what have you on your Kindle or iPad. Yeah, use what you have. He's still going to be watching. He's still, you're still going to be able to talk about the text. He's going to watch your mouth make the sounds. And so that's all very beautiful and all worthwhile.
Thank you, Amy. I think another question we had is more geared towards you, Amy. She said, my daughter is 4 and we are meeting the speech therapist tomorrow. Is there a correlation between reading and speaking?
Yeah, so, and we kind of intervene a lot with that in early ed. And my daughter also my youngest had childhood apraxia speech. So it can affect their reading. So what happens is a lot of times they might know the sound. They might be able to, know that this letter makes this sound, but they can't get their mouth to make that sound, right? They're having their jaw and their tongue and their mouth working, to make a sound. And so a lot of times when we know this at school, we will have them do sign language, right? So that's what my daughter did. So she would see she knew it was a t, but she would, sorry, I'm so used to doing the sounds. So she would see a T and she would know it's a T, but she wouldn't be able to say that. She would, have g, and so she would use a sign language to let us know that she knew that sound. And then we would keep working with her on those language sounds, as does the speech therapist at school. So we will all work in correlation to help. So there is a connection, but we intervene and do what we need to make sure that she has everything she needs. And my daughter's reading beautifully now, so it all works out.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. I do encourage you to go talk to your child's studio teachers and ask them more specifics about any questions that you might have about your child's reading and about how you can take some of these different resources and apply it to more specifically to what your child is needing. So we encourage you to do that. Barbara, do you have any closing thoughts? All right. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a great night.
Thank you.